Hello and welcome to our special online presentation sponsored by the Center for College and Career Readiness and our partner organization, the Common Core Institute. This is our second half of our presentation for Principles on Priorities. My name is Kevin Baird, kevin.baird at collegecareer.org. I'm your senior faculty for this presentation. I would like to note that much of the content that we're using here does come from the Common Core Institute and the Black Belt Certification Program, their graduate program. It's a year-long graduate program for leaders. We continue now. If you hopefully have seen the first part of the presentation, it takes about an hour, where we talk about college and career readiness, ask you to consider what that means for your schools, and then we talk about the principal, primary, measurable shifts in the Common Core standards and what they mean for you, some things that you need to be doing right now, thinking about measurement to the Common Core. So we're going to move forward in this section. We will look at some breaking news, examples from the new assessments, and then talk about what the priorities are that we need to be doing right now. Everything that I speak about is aligned to the National Pathway for Common Core Standards implementation. The National Pathway essentially says that we begin with deep capacity building. That's why that Black Belt graduate course exists. You need to have people in your buildings who are just as knowledgeable as any outside expert or consultant. From there, have them pair with your lead teachers, your pioneers, the folks who are excited and ready to go. But do that in an environment of awareness. All of your teachers should know and understand what's going on. They should all have a stake in it, but build your implementation on the backs of the pioneers who will do it and do it best and do it first. And then your principals, your assistant principals, your building leadership teams. Everything that I'm talking to you about today is based upon our experience with more than 2,000 educators in close connection over the last year, having trained more than 10,000 educators and administrators in the Common Core over the last year, year and a half. Please invest in principals, assistant principals, your building leadership teams. This year is the critical year for that action. I'm going to talk about curriculum and instruction and assessment. We must attack all three of these elements concurrently. They do not live in a silo. We must attack all of them at the same time, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and do that through the lens of sustainable implementation. Remember, what is your vision? What are you trying to do? How have you articulated that? Our vision is about college and career readiness. It is not about something so small as implementing a standard. It is not about a checklist. What are the skills that our teachers need? We cannot assume that they have all of the skills to implement these shifts. Investing in them, getting them the skills that they need. There's not enough money or enough time to get teachers where they need to be simply through days of professional development. Incentives. That's why we actually marry skills and incentives by ensuring that all of our professional development includes graduate credit from the University of Southern California Rossier School of Education, one of the best schools of ed in the country, because becoming trained, becoming certified, graduate credit is in and of itself a kind of incentive, and for most school districts actually can impact a teacher's pay. Resources. Remember, you're going to have lots of folks with new resources. They put a sticker on it. They said it's aligned to the Common Core. Make sure that those resources are really aligned. Much is in flux. Much is new. Take a look at some of these new assessment items and ask if it really looks like those new assessment items. And then the plan. We're speaking to you today about priority elements for your plan. I hope at the top of that, it's making sure that you, yourself, your leadership teams become as knowledgeable as any outside consultant, if not through Black Belt, through some other kind of graduate program. Also, there are monies available. So spend someone else's money. Get the grant. Tim Edwards at collegecareer.org. You can contact him. He can get you information about grant monies that will help you implement the types of things we're talking about here today. So we're going to look at some breaking news, things that are just out, just new examples from the Assessment Consortia, new data from the NAEP for 2011. What does it all mean? Let's understand this through assessment study. What do the new tests look like? For each of the following examples, I want you to ask what's different compared to your current lessons, not just your current tests, your current lessons. So in the first part, we saw this. Traditional U.S. problem, which fraction is closer to 1, 4/5 or 5/4. We know that in the Common Core we have to change our instructional practice, the kinds of questions that we ask in the classroom. Using a number line, that's a new element. Explain why this is so. The last part of that question is key, having the student explain their answer. As a matter of fact, if you read the research, if you read the standards from front cover to cover, if you read the new science standards, everyone agrees that the student who is able to explain why an answer exists, why a finding is correct, that student has a much greater level of understanding than a student who can simply compute a correct answer. Another example, in the second grade, I might have a lesson where I say when you add or subtract, line the numbers up on the right like this, not like this. What am I really teaching that student, however? Because when I get into third grade and I'm looking at numbers like this, what have I done? I haven't taught the student the mathematical concept. We try to operationalize things to help the student get the right answer, but that's the wrong thing to do. That doesn't help the student. And by the way, it's not going to help the student on the new assessments. Instead, have the student understand all the way back here that even though they don't see it, there's a little decimal. Use that word, use that vocabulary, introduce it right then. There's a little decimal. Line it up at the decimal place value. Teach place value, not the operation, just for lining it up. Consider the process of teaching, how we approach our mathematics instruction. What I'm about to show you. These strategies are strategies your teachers may feel uncomfortable with. They may not know how to do. You have to get them the skills, the understanding to do it. The new textbook, the new program isn't going to do it for you. For instance, have you ever seen this, the butterfly method? I'm teaching how to add these two fractions. This is actually from a commercial textbook, where I take 3 times 3 is 9, I multiply that way, 4 times 1 is 4, the head of the butterfly is addition, 9 plus 4 is 13, and the bottom is multiplication, 4 times 3 is 12, 13 12s. Well, yes, I did get the right answer there, and that worked until I have the Frankenstein butterfly, when I have multiple fractions that I am adding. And what about subtraction? We do this all the time in our classrooms as a way to help students take shortcuts, to do well on the test. But on the new tests, these strategies will not help the students do well. They will be lost. Consider an old test item, kindergarten. Kyla has these strawberries. She's going to give 4 strawberries to each of her 3 friends. How many strawberries will be left for Kyla? This is a kindergarten question now. Directly from the standards. Grade K, addition and subtraction. Take a look. I have to be able to read. From the very beginning, I have to be able to read. Now imagine you have numbers in here. We're not asking students in kindergarten to do algebra. But, for instance, look at the lower right-hand problem. Grandma has sea flowers. How many can she put in her red vase and how many in her blue vase? That question has multiple answers. It's more complex. Ask questions with multiple answers from the very beginning. Have your students read from the very beginning. Here you see we're solving for the product, right? Then going into grade 1, take a look. All right. Now I have more complex text. The text complexity goes up. As a matter of fact, I should be measuring the complexity of the text in my questions in mathematics. You can also see that I have multiple steps in my problems. It isn't just that I have more reading, I have multiple steps. I'm solving for a different unknown. That's grade 1. Grade 1, my friends. Now, there are not new assessments at grade 1, but I know that my students have to be achieving a level of mastery here in order to get to that level of mastery at the 3rd grade for the new assessment. This is a grade 2 performance task example. It's actually from engageny.org, all right, New York City. So I have an example again of an old problem where I'm looking at greater than or less than. Okay, you've seen problems like this. And now I have an example of a performance-based task that aligns to the Common Core. By the way, this is exactly and precisely the kinds of questions the assessment consortia are also showing us as examples. So instead of my question like this, oh, I have a number line. You already know those are important. I'm drawing a number line on the board. I have 3 questions in order. They are in order from most simple to most complex, but notice the form of the question is key. First, about where would 85 be? Put it on the number line. Well, that's the easiest one. I know that 85 is somewhere to the right of 42. I am evaluating proportionality here, getting a sense of the student can figure out, you know, where 85 would be given the proportion, the space between 0 and 42. All right, it's just a little bit more than double. Where would 21 be? Place 21 on the number line where it belongs. Notice 21 is exactly and precisely 1/2 of 42. And then where would 31 be? Notice that the answer to that question depends on whatever I said in number 4. And you'll also notice that 31 is just a tick less than 1/2 between 21 and 42. At the end of the day, I want you to think about precision, accuracy, mastery. How would the student show that they really understand these concepts? Well, of course, they would draw little tick marks on that number line to show that where 31 and 21 and 85 would be. And that would, by the way, define a level of mastery. So going beyond, being very precise, very accurate, and then the most important element, tell Carol how you knew where to place 31 and why. Explain your answer. Use mathematical reasoning. Write. Writing is critical in mathematics. Here we go into the 4th grade. Some of you have seen this before, the McDonald's claim. Is it true or false? Wikipedia reports that 8% of all Americans eat at McDonald's every day. In the U.S., there are approximately 310 million Americans, 12,800 McDonald's. The average McDonald's store can serve 1,500 people a day. The math question, is that true? Using mathematical evidence to defend your position, is this a fact, an opinion, or an estimation? I cannot figure out this problem without reading closely and decomposing the problem in English into a mathematical problem, then solving it and bringing it back into English and writing. This is an example for 7th grade, where I am seeing a number of standards. This is Content Standard 7.3. Also claim number 1. Claim number 1 would be an assessment claim, all right, from the Assessment Consortia, where I'm asked on the assessment to design a new set of coins. The thing here, I'm dealing in millimeters. I'm going to have to read the specification very closely for the kinds of coins, and then figure out how to make that set of coins where I can get the as many coins as possible. Writing the diameters, being very close in my labels, very precise. But again, I can't do it if I can't read and reason through. Analytical thinking. This is a new assessment question. The high school exit question. So here's an example for today. You've seen these. This is an example of a current state test or end-of-course exam. On Monday, Lisa's fishbowl contained 1 gallon of water. On Friday, the fishbowl contained 0.75 gallons of water. By what percentage did the amount of water in Lisa's fishbowl decrease? I like to ask the question, who cares? You would just simply, what? Put more water in the fish tank. Here, from the Assessment Consortia, is an 11th grade extended response task. I have a square metal sheet. It's going to be made into an open-topped water tank. I'm going to cut squares. By the way, the word square is very important because that has a very specific geometric relationship. Cut squares from 4 corners of the sheet. bend the 4 remaining rectangular pieces up to form sides, and then I'm going to be welding them together. This is real world, by the way. This activity happens all the time. How do I get at the right answer for this kind of question? Well, frankly, you'd probably create a chart where you would look at the different sizes of the squares to cut out, and you would have to know the equation for volume for this kind of shape. From that table, you could create a graph, and indeed, what I'm asked to do is sketch a rough graph, explain the shape of the graph in words, tell why it is the way it is, it's going to be a bell curve, and then write the algebraic formula for volume. Also, then tell me how large should the 4 corners be cut so that the resulting volume of the tank is as large as possible. I can tell you that the students who would be rated at a mastery level, and the new assessments, by the way, are likely to be graded on a scale from novice to more on level or proficient to a level of mastery, same way as the NAEP is. The student who goes beyond would show the chart, show their work, be very precise in their language, and likely have found that it is not a whole number that is going to yield the greatest volume, and indeed that this would be an estimate that to really answer this you would have to move into calculus. Okay? All examples of new assessment items. So what does this mean for your classroom? Your students have to read. They have to be dealing with much more complex problems from the outset, problems that have multiple steps, being very precise in their language, in their labeling. Rigor is defined by what the teacher expects and the kinds of problems the teacher is assigning. Here's another performance task, all right, where I have Kevin and Shana Johnson's mother. She had some very high gas heating bills. I'm going to have to read those bills. I'm going to have to understand the concept of a heating degree day. I could go out to Wikipedia and read that. Essentially, in this performance example, the mom spent some money and she did some repairs to her house. I need to compare the gas bills, estimate savings due to new insulation and ceiling, and explain my reasoning. This is a math problem. Decide whether the insulation and ceiling work was cost-effective and provide evidence for my decision. Mathematics is all about nonfiction informational text in the Common Core. It's all about reading, using evidence, critical thinking, and writing. Being able to solve the problems by taking them in English, transposing them into the language of mathematics, and then taking them back. Here's another example, a very new one, seeing structure in a quadratic equation. A student would have this kind of question. You might say, well, yeah, I just have to solve for x. But actually, I'm not just solving for x. We are looking for the student to be able to solve this question quickly, and actually there's more than one solution. This problem is getting at an understanding of a quadratic equation, that the equation has a particular structure, and that when I see that structure, I know that I can solve it pretty easily. Q squared equals 2Q. In the Common Core, I can understand what I need to teach and how I need to teach it and what my classroom looks like by understanding materials from the assessment consortia. I've just taken you through a number of math examples. Let's look at English Language Arts. In English Language Arts, it's all about engaging with complex text. This graphic is from the PARCC Assessment Consortia. Engaging with complex text, extracting and employing evidence, and then building knowledge, especially by writing or answering specific kinds of questions. Remember that I am almost always going to be reading a complex text, very often a piece of nonfiction text. If it is literature, it's going to be really great literature. So in the first part, we saw this example where I was looking at that Utah ecosystem. I have picture prompts. Please remember, picture prompts, graphic organizers, Venn diagrams are all critical kinds of elements to use in your classroom. You should be seeing them Also, I have my word bank, but I'm using those words here, highest order thinking skills. We saw some other examples before, like the importance of listening and speaking. Speaking aloud, having students debate and argue, even as early as kindergarten. Kindergartners are great debaters, right? That I have, for instance, with the PARC Consortia, 5 tests. One of them is wholly focused on speaking and listening. In the Smarter Balanced Assessment, speaking and listening is integrated. These are new standards that I have, speaking and listening. So let's take a look at a 7th grade example now, since we looked in the first part at our elementary grade examples. Here's a 7th grade example, constructed response from the Assessment Consortia. I'm going to read the text, biography of Amelia Earhart. I'm going to read some text from that. That's a real source. And I'm going to write an essay that summarizes and explains the challenges that Earhart faced. Remember to use textual evidence. This is really just getting me started. But you'll notice that I'm really reading a piece of text. It's authentic text, and I am doing my writing. My writing is going to require evidence, and I'm doing summation. Now, what's next? The next step is to read more sources, right? More sources, more items related to that same concept. So now I'm going to read 2 more pieces of content: Earhart's Final Resting Place, Believe Found, and Amelia Earhart's Life and Disappearance. Now remember, I could expect that one of these might be a little bit harder, one of them might be a little bit easier, so I'm reading at a range, but I'm also reading a variety of sources. Then I'm going to do another writing, and that writing, just like we saw in the 3rd grade example in part 1, where we talked about students might read a first-hand account and a second-hand account, and then answer some comprehension questions or do a research type question. Well, here I'm going to write an essay that analyzes the strength of the arguments about Earhart's bravery in at least 2 of those texts. Use textual evidence. By the way, you could, in every classroom, even down to kindergarten, have students reading a piece of literature, like, for instance, that example of Beatrix Potter and Peter Cottontail, right, and a piece of nonfiction, and then writing some kind of synthesis piece across the curriculum. You could start that tomorrow. That's what's going to be expected on the new assessments, all right? Notice how heavy it is for writing. Now let's take a look at grade 10. I really love this example because one of the things in high school that we often encounter for resistance is a real concern that my teachers are teaching literature, and they are very oftentimes concerned about changing their curriculum. They want to teach what they've been teaching, but especially this idea that 70% of everything that student reads across the school day, of course, should be nonfiction informational text. Well, here I have an example of literature. So this is a grade 10 literature assessment item. We're using Ovid's Daedalus and Icarus and Anne Sexton's work, To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Triumph. The first question that I would ask you is, if you are at all involved in high school, where in your high schools do we teach Daedalus and Icarus, the full text? Because in the American curriculum, oftentimes this text is not taught to all students. It is only accessible in a AP course or an honors course. This assessment item is for all students. By the way, that's an important thing to note. The stuff that you're doing in your honors courses should probably be moved down to all students. My first question: use what I've learned from reading Daedalus and Icarus by Ovid and To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Triumph by Anne Sexton, and write an essay. There's my writing again, and I'm going to provide an analysis of how Anne Sexton transforms Daedalus and Icarus. I have some hints as a starting point. I might want to consider what's emphasized, absent, or different in the 2 texts, but feel free to develop your own focus. Develop your essay by providing textual evidence. Follow conventions of standard English. These are all strategies you could use in your classrooms right away. And then I have some questions. Notice the way the questions happen, how they flow. My first question: which of the following sentences best states an important theme about human behavior? So I'm going to select one, but I'm not going to stop there, okay? And by the way, this would be a text-dependent question. I'm going to have to read the question, but look. Now I'm going to select 3 pieces of evidence, not just one, so it's not multiple guess, from Daedalus and Icarus that support my answer in Part A. Choose 3 answers in Part B that are evidence, right, that support my answer in Part A. This is very similar to the question I showed you with the number line, where I have the easier question and then progressively more difficult questions, where my answer is dependent upon what I answered in my previous question. So in summary, you already know you have to be using more complex text, especially nonfiction text like Amelia Earhart, but here you saw complex text in literature. Take the stuff that you're probably doing in honors classes and get it down to all of your students. By the way, your students can read it. I promise you. I can teach you and others can teach you how to help them read it. Use text-dependent questions and critical thinking prompts. Evidence and argument, vocabulary, writing. Writing. In mathematics, you can see it's all about the type of the math problem. The math problem needs to be very different than the kind of math problem we're used to seeing. It needs to have text. It needs to be a critical thinking problem. And also remember from Part 1, focus on those math fluencies. So, what does English Language Arts or Social Studies or Science look like in your school? How is math instruction different given those examples from the assessments? Ovid, Daedalus and Icarus in the 10th grade, reading 3 pieces on Amelia Earhart, right? In the elementary grades, just listening closely, maybe to a video and doing something from it. Debating as early as kindergarten. In mathematics, having questions like that McDonald's prompt, where I have to really take the question apart as early as 3rd or 4th grade. How's the instruction different? I want to talk about immediate priorities for principals and building leadership teams. If you're with a team, you might want to pause and consider the reflection question. How do things look different? What do we think our priorities are? What do we think needs to change first before we move into the next and last section, which are our priorities? One of the things to note is that at the Common Core Institute, the senior faculty there have been working for several years now on Common Core implementation. At the Center for College and Career Readiness, we've been working on issues of college and career strategies for a long while, significantly before the Common Core. We know from the research, for instance, some of the faculty participate with the CCSSO, the authors of the standards, with their survey of enacted curriculum, which, by the way, is one of the largest research studies ever. It was funded by the National Science Foundation in the implementation of curriculum and instruction aligned to standards. We know from that work, we know from the research, we know from the standards, but we also know from working literally over the last 18 months with thousands of administrators, big and little districts, where people start to fall down, where the challenges are. The priorities that I'm about to tell you about, that I'm going to implore you, I'm going to beg you to do, are based specifically on where we see other districts in the United States. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. National Pathway for Common Core Implementation. Everything that I'm talking about here is directly aligned to that pathway. I also want to note that this presentation was originally developed for the Common Core Black Belt program, talking about priorities for now. That national pathway, remember, everything with your priority, it needs to be a priority for your black belts, your key core consultants, people who are just as educated as any outside consultant, then moving to your lead teachers, your pioneers, but available to all. As I talk about your priorities, please remember that your first priority is sustainable change. What is your vision? How are you describing your vision for these elements? How are you ensuring that your teachers are acquiring the skills they need? Are you providing an incentive like graduate credit? What are the resources they have? What is your plan? It begins here. Your plan begins with developing capacity building, okay? So do, right now, Focus first on instructional practice. If you haven't started remapping your curriculum, if you haven't done any of those things, please focus on just one element of instructional practice. You might be starting with a kind of problem in mathematics. You might have Freaky Fridays, where every Friday in math class you're going to start with the hardest problem, the problem that has a lot of text, and you're going to spend the whole day working through that problem. You might focus on text-dependent questions in English language arts. You can choose from the shifts. We've shown you the shifts. Choose one. You're not going to succeed if you don't choose one priority to ask people to do. Then begin revising your curriculum. Focus on complexity. I'm going to show you something about that in a moment. Focus on complexity in your curriculum. If you have been doing curriculum mapping, please, I beg of you, stop the way you've been doing it. Focus on creating instructional blueprints. Curriculum maps simply become shelf work. Build deep capacity so that the answer to a question is just around the corner or is in the classroom next door. That's actually how you build acceleration amongst your own staff, is by having people who have the answers right there inside of the school. If you have federal program directors, educate them. Educate them about where they should be spending their money. They will save money and you will have more resources to do what you need to do. Start talking to your community. The homework that's showing up should start to be different. Their students should start to have different and more complex and harder to read books. Math becomes different. You want them to know what's happening. And frankly, you want to start setting up an expectation, because the new assessments, the new tests, are going to be much harder. And start using Lexiles to measure and quantiles. If you don't know what those are, email me. I will make sure that you get connected with people who can help you understand what Lexiles are and quantiles are. You could be measuring right now your students' progress. You could actually be forecasting where each and every student is to college and career readiness. I want you to focus on high-fives, high-fidelity impact strategies. These are the strategies that are going to give you the most bang for your time and for your buck. But the first thing is about you. It's about your coherence lens. If you're doing classroom observation, classroom evaluation, maybe you have RTI, maybe you're working on vocabulary, maybe you're working on writing, whatever it is, there's other stuff happening inside of your school building. How is this all coherent? You create coherence through your vision. So what is your vision for this year? How does it align with the priorities of Common Core instruction? Please make sure it is not about implementing standards. Please make sure your vision is about college and career readiness. Remember, the bigger the vision, the more people follow. But your vision should be specific, and it should be measurable. A key core priority is focusing on principal development right now. This year, if we do not develop our building leaders so that they have the understanding of what they should be looking for, how to coach their teachers, how to deploy their resources, what their materials should look like, we will not succeed. Because really, we have this year and next year, and then the new assessments are going to be out. So this year, we have to get it together. And by getting it together, it is about the building principal and the leadership team. What are they responsible for? What do high fidelity impact strategies look like? Focus, if you can, on increasing complexity. How do you increase complexity in the classroom with your principal? After you start that work, make sure that everyone, all of your teachers, have awareness of what's happening in the Common Core. There are a variety of different programs that you might use. Here is just a smattering, and it's just an example. I don't care if you do these, but go out and find good quality, graduate level, advanced level programming. For instance, the Principals Academy that's listed here, it says 30 hours. It's 10-hour-long webinars and then some on-site practicum. It carries with it graduate level credit from USC Rossier. Your principals would benefit from that period, but I would submit to you, if they do not understand the depth of college and career readiness shifts, and they don't themselves know some of those critical strategies for implementing it, like how to actually do close reading, They can't lead their teachers. It's impossible. They won't know the questions to ask inside of a staff meeting. Please do this. Get the skills that are needed. Because it's number two. If I have the vision for college and career readiness, I have to have the skills. And by the way, I want you to note, see the word on the right where it says anxiety? I'm sure you have experienced that your teachers are very anxious. They're concerned. They feel overwhelmed. Your principals too. It's because they don't have the skills, or they don't see the skills. They don't see the way forward, precisely what to do. You build confidence by building proficiency. All right, enough on that soapbox. Focus on one thing. Prioritization is key. So your vision should be around that one thing. Imagine if you said, we're all going to do one thing, and we're all going to do it differently. We're going to do it every day. We're going to focus on this key skill. You would actually start to make progress on that one thing, and we're going to talk about what those key high-fidelity things are. And then secondly, after you focus on that one thing and you get them doing it differently, have them do it differently but with existing resources, because you don't have enough money and you don't have enough time to change all your resources. So if your teachers learn to teach just one high-impact, high-fidelity impact strategy, just one strategy they learn to do differently, they will augment and actually transform the same old crappy curriculum into something that's a little bit more special, that's certainly more aligned to college and career readiness. Okay, curriculum, instruction, assessment. If you're thinking about curriculum, if that's where you're starting with your stuff, you have to approach it differently, my friends. If you've done curriculum mapping, stop doing it the way you've been doing it, please. Some folks say, we want our teachers to feel ownership of curriculum. That's great, but lead them through a process where they own the curriculum, and the curriculum is actually going to get your kids towards college and career readiness. So you need to translate your existing curriculum maps into instructional blueprints. I participated in one of the largest studies of curriculum mapping ever. What we found was that curriculum maps actually end up just sitting on the shelf like old scope and sequence. They mean nothing. But there are steps you can take that actually make them living, breathing documents that teachers use. We call those instructional blueprints. You have to start with complexity of the content and inquiry. For instance, nonfiction text and text-dependent questions, or Bloom's Q questions at higher levels of cognitive demand. Embed those questions and those supports right into the document, so the teacher doesn't just have a blueprint of what they're supposed to teach, but they have key critical helps that transform that map into a blueprint that they want to use in their class all the time, because it really helps them. Also, you must be thinking about depth of knowledge, because the new assessments are all about depth of knowledge. As a matter of fact, the assessment consortia have taught us, if you have black belts in your school right now, they know or will come to know what the depth of knowledge indicators are for the assessments, depth of knowledge. In English language arts, when it comes to content, you need to be integrating more nonfiction, stuff from social studies and science, and the classics in terms of literature. Hands down, period, you have to do it. There's no other choice. In math, you want to be using text-based problems first. Use those problems as your lens for instruction, not just for practice. A lot of times there isn't time to get to the hardest problem, so we miss it. So start with the hardest problem. Also do more modeling problems and include more short answer questions. Write in math class, explain your answer. Remember, in math, you do have shifts in domains. You want to focus on those fluencies, on the basics in K1 and 2, moving into fractions in 3, 4, and 5, then to pre-algebra and algebra in 6, 7, and 8. And here are the fluencies. Focus here inside of your curriculum. If you're going to redo your curriculum maps in mathematics, the single first thing that you should ask yourself is, how am I embedding the fluencies in the grade levels in complex math problems that have text to read? That's it. Remember from the first section here, our first video, part 1, I showed you this website. It's from the authors of the standards. It shows you instructional time. Don't just give your teachers a map, a scope and sequence, but you want to show them where their instructional time should be spent, and not just at content, but at what level of critical thinking should I be providing instruction. When it comes to instruction, that was about curriculum. When it comes to instruction, writing, I'm going to talk to you about the 2011 NAEP. It tells you precisely and exactly what to do when it comes with writing. This data is just out. By the way, the 2011 NAEP in writing was the first NAEP ever to use to be on the computer. It used specific kinds of technologies that are very similar to the technologies we're going to use on the new assessments, and it told us some things, specifically what we should do. But first of all, here's the bad news. Just over 1/4 of America's students in 8th grade and 12th grade were proficient or above on the assessment. That's bad news, because when you think about all of those assessment items I just showed you, all the assessment examples from the Common Core Assessment Consortia, it was all about writing, wasn't it? Writing with Amelia Earhart to multiple sources, writing in Ovid, writing in mathematics. But when it comes to writing, just over 24% of our students are actually proficient. That's bad news. And by the way, similar to the ACT forecast, which was originally done in 2010, you can see that in terms of our students as they vary across the demographics, our African American students, our black students, only about 90% of them are going to fail. 90%. Only 10% are proficient. We saw the same thing before. My Hispanic students here in writing, it's 14% were proficient or advanced. My friends, this is critical. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, 22% were proficient. 88% were not. Now the good news is if you look at the students in the basic level, we might think about those as bubble kids. We can start moving them up pretty rapidly. And the assessment told us what to do. One of the first things we know to do is to make sure that the kinds of stuff we have students writing is aligned to the NAEP and the Common Core, which is what? Making sure we're doing persuasive writing and evidence-based writing, always using evidence. You'll notice here it also talks about having an authentic audience. One of the things we know is that writing is much less impactful if I don't have an authentic audience. In science, in social studies, I can begin my lesson with writing. Some things that we learned from that NAEP. We learned that students who use their computers more frequently to draft and revise their writing scored much higher. Look at the score here in figure 13 for the students who always or almost always use the computer as compared to those who never did or hardly ever did. Now one of the things that's really interesting, and again if you email me I'll send you the link to the whole report, one of the things that's interesting are the students who failed, who were not proficient, they had access to a computer. They just weren't using it. So things to do, things you could do right now, require weekly use of a computer for writing. All right, almost all of your students have access to a computer somewhere. It might be in the library, it might be in the public library, it might be in an after-school program, it might be at grandma's house. But if at all possible, require weekly use of the computer for writing, especially for revising and editing. Require 4 to 5 pages of writing weekly. If you had in your English Language Arts and Social Studies classes every single week that each of those classes were supposed to write 3 pages or 2 pages every week, you would make profound change. The NAEP showed us this. And the NAEP also showed us that the use of thesaurus, direct, distinct vocabulary instruction, understanding the impact vocabulary has on the meaning of what I'm writing. Principles. You should be seeing thesaurus use in every single class. That would include, by the way, science and math when they are writing. Here are priority elements. Choose one. Choose using the computer. Choose 4 to 5 pages of writing every week. Choose the thesaurus, but choose one of these as your priority. I'd also note that in the NAEP there were links to a variety of resources. They're really, really good resources. And you can see that there are a variety of different kinds of tasks and a scoring rubric for each task. You can use these across your classroom. As a matter of fact, I would suggest to you as we get into assessment, I'm going to ask you to think about creating performance assessments across every grade. You could use some of these tasks as performance assessments, and then they would be common, and you even have a scoring rubric. Okay? So that's all in the 2011 NAEP. When we think about instruction, make sure that you're thinking especially about writing. Now, when it comes to assessment, the assessment examples that I showed you were also about writing. So writing is so important. It's doing double duty. But also remember, with my assessment, I need to be writing to multiple sources. I need to have read multiple sources. I need to be doing those extended performance tasks. If it's just always short answer, I'm not going to get there. You've seen how complex some of those performance tasks are, like this one that you saw in part 1, where I have to read a number of different energy bills, and this is a math performance assessment, read the whole task, and then figure out if my work was actually cost effective. Remember that when it comes to assessment from the assessment consortia, it's all about engaging with complex text, extracting and employing evidence, and building knowledge, especially by writing and by using prompts from social studies and science. In mathematics, for my assessments, start with fluency. Instruction and assessment go together. Assess my fluency over and over and over. Remember that assessments are very important to instruction as well. These are your priorities, my friends. I don't have to spend a lot of time. I'm going to show you in a minute a little bit of research that supports why these are priorities, but I'll just go back over them. Fluency in mathematics, complex text and evidence and writing, the use of performance tasks across the curriculum for assessment. Make them common performance tasks. Use examples that you get from the NAEP for writing examples. Require your students to write weekly on the computer 4 to 5 pages of writing and use the thesaurus. That's what we found on the NAEP. I'm just going backwards here. In instruction, use writing as a key critical element and marry it into your content. Your content should be higher critical thinking skills. Tell your teachers where to spend their time teaching in terms of cognitive demand as well as content. The fluencies in mathematics, you're going to have to change when it comes to your curriculum. Change your focus areas for math. Nonfiction, use social studies, use science, use the classics for complex text in your content. In math, start with the hardest problems. And remember, when you're thinking about redoing your curriculum, redo it differently. Start with complexity and inquiry. Make sure you're including vocabulary and depth of knowledge or critical thinking. Choose just one of those. Focus on just one thing and integrate it into your very broad vision. We're going to close now with a little bit more data. This is a condition of College and Career Readiness 2012 by the ACT. If you would like to know how your state is doing, you can email me and I can get you state data, okay? Let's take a look. Well, what we found, first of all, I want you to note that even though we sometimes get caught up in the idea that we're focused too much on college and careers, that the vast majority of our students across the races, okay, that all of them are interested in, here you go, college. They're thinking about 2-year college or a bachelor's degree or a graduate and professional degree. 1/3 of African American students indicate a graduate and professional degree is on their horizon. Nearly half a bachelor's degree. We can't assume that our kids aren't thinking of college. They are. But even if they are thinking about a trade, how many trades today require a certificate, a 2-year degree? But when it comes to my readiness for going to college without remediation, without having to take high school level courses, which, by the way, those students are 41% more likely to drop out if they have to take remedial courses. Well, Here's the data I showed you in the first half, the 2011 data. Here's 2012. My friends, we didn't move the needle. 31% of our students are ready to meet those benchmarks in science, 46% in math, 52% in reading. Still, a quarter of our students are only a quarter meet those benchmarks across all 4 subjects. All right? Now, I want you to look here because this really speaks volumes. The students that got those results, you see them here in red, the results that those students got when they are taking the core curriculum, the regular curriculum. Your students that are in remediation, that are in the easier classes, that are in the pseudo-biology class, that are in a tier 3 course or whatever, my friends, we are hurting them. We need to stop it. Just stop it. We have to educate all of our students, all students. This is right from the standards. All students should have equality of opportunity to learn at the highest level. If you study the standards, if you go into one of those graduate degree programs, you're going to see that in the research, they took students who were bad in mathematics and they put them in the most advanced math classes and they did better. The core curriculum is driving that. If you're putting them in less than core, we are hurting them. And this graph looks at our students and the percentage of those students who are not ready versus who are ready and where they are going. So, for instance, 10% of all the students that went to 4-year private colleges, 10% that went to 4-year private colleges had mastered none of the college and career benchmarks, 14% that went to a 4-year public. By the time you get to your 2-year colleges, 41% of our students that went to 2-year colleges, they had mastered none, 0 of those college and career ready benchmarks. And the students that go on to college, well, 48% of them had not mastered any of those benchmarks. The benchmarks matter. College and career readiness matters, and we are sending our kids both to private schools, private colleges. Even the students who are getting into those private schools have not mastered, 10% of them had not mastered any of the college and career readiness benchmarks. The ACT gives us some suggestions, like infusing a culture of post-secondary success. That's your vision. Rigor, clarity of purpose, accuracy, precision. Expanding rigorous high school courses. Remember, all of our students would receive that question like that Ovid question in 10th grade, not just our honors students. And ensuring early monitoring and intervention. If you are not currently measuring and monitoring using Lexile right now, email me. I can show you how to do it. Use quantiles. Use the measurements. You might want to pause and reflect on what this means for your classroom. What are your priorities? What are you going to choose? There are resources to help. I'm going to show you some resources and then my email address. Corepedia.org. It is a free website. Corepedia, it has links, actually proctored links for resources. There's that's the National Clearinghouse for College and Career Resources that are doctorally reviewed. You have the standards there. Most importantly, it lets you look at the standards as a progression. The progressions are actually more important to understanding the standards than any kind of deconstruction. For instance, here, look at the difference in the language of the standards between grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4. If I understand the difference between these 3 grades, I understand, for instance, what on-grade level means for grade 3, but what is a lower proficiency and a higher proficiency just by looking at the language of the standard and what is different in progression. CommonCoreInstitute.org, variety of programs that are there. Again, I don't care if you do them, guys. Do something, though. Just do something. There are also a variety of regional institutes that are offered where you can get graduate credit as well. And there are different kinds of publications, both from the Institute and from others. You may know Kylene Beers and Bob Probst. They are rock stars in the world of reading. They have a black belt course. You can get their book from Hynek Heinemann Publishers. Here's the Common Core Lesson Planner. Please remember, one of your critical resources is you, and making sure that everything you do is through that lens for sustainable change. If your teachers have anxiety, it's because they're concerned about their skills, the ability to get it done. Here are more resources. The first link here, the first URL, is that free website, the SEC, Survey of Enacted Curriculum, where it shows those dark squares where I should be focusing my instructional time and the level of cognitive demand. NationalGeographic.com, lots of nonfiction, nctm.org. Use the tools that they have there. They're tools like you're going to see on the assessments, okay? Remember, read nonfiction and write persuasively. Align with critical thinking. Implement the math practices by choosing the hard math problems first for instruction and the first English language art anchor. Use prompts that are getting at text dependency and higher order thinking skills. And don't deconstruct the standards. It's already been done. Use them as a tool. Remember, your on-level students today are 2 grade levels behind. They need as much help as your students in special education. Get the grant. There's funding to help you implement. Tim Edwards at collegecareer.org. Tim can hook you up. Lastly, some of you may have seen this before. It's really not about you because you are accessing this already. It is about your team. Now, hopefully your team is more diverse and significantly more attractive than these folks, but we want to get them from the face of change, the face of anxiety, to this fellow, right? Someone who feels supported in their jobs every day. That's why we don't do curriculum maps anymore that are going to sit on a shelf. We embed key critical helps. You can actually give them the questions to ask at the highest levels of critical thinking inside of a curriculum map, and they'll use them. Think about your team, and thank you so much. My name is Kevin Baird, kevin.baird at collegecareer.org. Again, this presentation is usually given as part of a half-day workshop for principals. It's underwritten by the Center for College and Career Readiness. You can bring this session to your school. We go over the same content, but obviously with more interaction and hands-on. Take care, everyone. Email me if you have questions. Email Tim to get the grant. Bye-bye.